My sister got the down payment for her house from my parents. Now they're asking me to help pay it off, and then I'm Madison, Maddie to most people. I'm 27, and I've worked really hard to build a life for myself. I've got a solid job as a marketing manager, and while I don't make a ton of money, I'm doing okay. I rent a small apartment, save what I can, and I try to live within my means. Financial responsibility has always been a big deal to me, especially because my parents, Karen and David, always drilled into me how important it was to save for the future, which is why I'm so floored by what I just found out. Let me give you a little context about my family. I have an older sister, Chloe, who's 30 and married to Brandon. They have 2 kids under 5, and Chloe has been a stay-at-home mom since their oldest was born. Brandon, on the other hand, is, well, let's just say he's not the most reliable guy. He works random freelance jobs, tries his hand at side hustles that never go anywhere, and generally seems to coast by. But Chloe is always talking about how happy they are, how family comes first, and how they make it work. I'm genuinely happy for her, or at least I was until now. Earlier this week, I was on the phone with my mom, just catching up. I've been thinking about buying a house in a year or two, so I casually mentioned I'd started saving for a down payment. That's when she hit me with it. Oh, Chloe and Brandon wouldn't have been able to buy their house if we hadn't helped with the down payment, she said, like it was no big deal. My brain short-circuited. What? I asked her what she meant, and she explained, again, like it was the most normal thing in the world, that she and Dad had given Chloe and Brandon $50,000 a couple of years ago so they could buy their house. Let me repeat that, $50,000. My mom explained they had pulled the money out of Dad's 401k and a small savings account they'd been building for years. I knew from experience that withdrawing from retirement accounts early comes with penalties, but apparently, they were so focused on helping Chloe and Brandon that they didn't care about the long-term consequences. I'm not sure what shocked me more, the fact that my parents had that kind of money to throw around, or the fact that they never told me. I mean, they always made it sound like they were scraping by. When I was in college, they told me there was no way they could help me with tuition, so I busted my ass working part-time jobs and took out loans. I've been paying those off ever since. But apparently, 2 years later, they magically found 50 grand lying around? I pressed my mom on where the money came from, and she admitted they'd taken it out of Dad's retirement account. We didn't think it would be a big deal, she said. We figured Chloe and Brandon would pay us back once things stabilized. When I asked why they didn't tell me, my mom got defensive. She said it wasn't something I needed to know, and that Chloe and Brandon needed the help more than I did. She even threw in a line about how, "You don't have kids, Maddie, so it's different." That stung. I've always known Chloe was the favorite, but I didn't realize how far that favoritism went until now. But wait, it gets worse. My parents are retired now, and my dad's health isn't great. They don't have much income outside of Social Security, and my mom let it slip that their savings are basically gone. It turns out they've been using what's left of their retirement fund to help Chloe and Brandon cover their mortgage payments. And now they're in trouble. Big trouble. Cue the real kicker. They want me to step in and help them pay off Chloe's mortgage. I couldn't believe it. I asked why Chloe and Brandon weren't taking care of their own house, and my mom said something about how Brandon's work situation has been unpredictable. And then she hit me with the guilt trip of all guilt trips. You know, Maddie, family helps family. Chloe and Brandon are doing the best they can, but they have 2 little kids to think about. We're all just trying to keep them afloat. When I told her I didn't think I could afford to help, she got even more defensive. We helped you plenty, Maddie. Don't forget that. Let me clarify something here. They didn't help me plenty. Yes, they put a roof over my head and food on the table while I was growing up. Yes, I love them, and I'm grateful for that. But that's the bare minimum, right? The truth is, I've been financially independent since I was 18. Everything I have, I've earned on my own. So to hear my mom act like I owe them for something as basic as parenting, it felt like a slap in the face. The conversation ended with my mom saying, "Just think about it." But I'm still reeling. I called my boyfriend, Liam, afterward, and he was just as shocked as I was. He said I'd be crazy to get involved and that Chloe and Brandon need to take responsibility for their own lives. But he's not in my family, you know? He doesn't understand the guilt trips, the expectation that I'll be the good daughter who steps up when things get hard. And here's the thing. I love my parents. I really do. They've made mistakes, sure, but they've always been there for me in other ways. And Chloe is my sister. I don't want to see her lose her house, especially since my nieces would be affected. But is this really my responsibility? I've been turning this over in my head all week, and the more I think about it, the angrier I get. Chloe and Brandon are grown adults who made their own decisions. If they couldn't afford the house, they shouldn't have bought it. And my parents should have set boundaries instead of bleeding themselves dry to save them. I'm trying to stay calm, but I know I need to have a serious conversation with my parents. I also feel like I need to confront Chloe and Brandon, but I have no idea how to do that without blowing up our entire family dynamic. Am I crazy for feeling this way? How do I even start to navigate this? I called a family meeting. I figured it was the best way to get everyone on the same page, or at least clear the air. I told my parents and my sister, Chloe, that I wanted to talk, and we agreed to meet at my parents' house. I felt sick walking in, knowing this conversation wasn't going to end well. Let me tell you, it did not disappoint. I started off calmly, explaining how blindsided I felt. I told them it hurt that they had helped Chloe with such a massive down payment and never even mentioned it to me. I also laid out how I'd been working my ass off to stay afloat financially, and now they were asking me to step in and clean up someone else's mess. I thought I made a pretty solid case. But, of course, Chloe didn't see it that way. You act like we're just sitting around, Maddie, but you don't understand what it's like to raise kids, she snapped. We needed that help, and Mom and Dad gave it to us because they knew we were in a tough spot. And now they need help, so what's the big deal? Family helps family. I could feel my blood boiling, but I tried to keep it together. I'm not saying you didn't need help, Chloe, I said. I'm saying this whole situation is unfair. If you knew you couldn't afford a house, why did you buy one? And why haven't you and Brandon stepped up now that Mom and Dad are struggling? Chloe rolled her eyes. It's easy for you to sit there and judge when you don't have kids or a mortgage. You don't get it. That's when I turned to my parents. So, what's the plan here? How much do you expect me to give? Because I'm not exactly rolling in cash either. My mom gave me the most heartbreaking look, and for a second, I actually felt bad. We're not asking you to cover everything, Maddie, she said softly. But we thought you could pitch in, maybe $1,000 a month, just until things stabilize. $1,000 a month? Stabilize? I practically choked on the word. What does that even mean? How long are we talking? Months? Years? Forever? My dad jumped in at this point, looking uncomfortable. We just need to get through this rough patch. Chloe and Brandon will get back on their feet soon. I'm sure of it. Now, here's the thing. I would have been more open to helping if I thought this was actually temporary. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Chloe and Brandon weren't struggling because of bad luck. They were struggling because they'd made terrible decisions. And it didn't take long for Brandon to confirm that. He wasn't at the meeting, probably for the best, but later that night, I got a call from him. At first, I thought he might be calling to smooth things over, but nope. He was pissed. Look, Maddie, he said, I know you don't agree with how we do things, but this isn't your business. We're doing the best we can, and it's not like we're asking you for money directly. Your parents are asking you to help them. That's between you and them, not us. But it is about you, Brandon, I snapped. You're the reason they're in this mess. Why aren't you stepping up and taking care of your own mortgage? That's when he dropped the bombshell. Brandon hasn't been paying his share of the mortgage for months. Apparently, he's been sinking money into some business venture that just needs a little more time to take off. He wouldn't give me details, but I could tell from the way he was talking that it's one of those sketchy, get-rich-quick schemes. I eventually pieced together that Brandon had sunk money into at least 2 failed ventures in the past year alone. A landscaping company he tried to start with no experience, and some kind of cryptocurrency trading that went south when the market tanked. He'd convinced Chloe they just needed one big break, but it sounded like they were gambling with money they didn't have. I was furious. So let me get this straight, I said. You're gambling on some business idea while my parents drain their retirement fund. And now you think I should step in and cover for you? You don't understand how hard it is, Maddie, he said. You don't have kids. You don't have the pressure we do. That's when I lost it. Stop using your kids as an excuse, Brandon. This isn't about them. It's about you and Chloe refusing to live within your means. And now you expect me to clean up your mess? No, absolutely not. I hung up before he could say anything else. The next day, my mom called to smooth things over, but it just made me feel worse. She mentioned they'd spoken to a financial advisor before taking out the loan, but all the advice seemed to go out the window once they thought about Chloe losing her home. He told us it was risky, she admitted. But what were we supposed to do? Just let her and the girls end up on the street? She admitted she didn't know Brandon had stopped paying his share of the mortgage. She also admitted that their retirement fund was almost completely gone. Why didn't you tell me this before? I asked her. I didn't want you to worry, she said, and I thought we could handle it. But now, Maddie, I'm scared. If we can't keep up with the payments, Chloe and Brandon could lose the house. And if that happens, where will the kids go? There it was again. The kids, my sweet little nieces, who didn't ask for any of this. I felt so torn. Part of me wanted to swoop in and save the day, but another part of me was screaming, this isn't your responsibility. Liam, my boyfriend, has been my rock through all of this. When I told him about the latest developments, he was livid. Maddie, you have to stop letting them manipulate you, he said. They're using guilt to make you feel responsible for their bad decisions. But it's not your job to save them. He's right, of course. I know he is. But it's not that simple. If I walk away, I feel like I'm abandoning my family. If I help, I'm enabling their bad behavior. And here's the worst part. I've already given them money. After my mom's call, I felt so guilty that I transferred $2,000 to her account. I told myself it was a one-time thing, just to buy them a little breathing room. But now I'm worried I've opened the floodgates. What if they come back for more? What if this never ends? I don't know what to do. I feel like I'm being pulled in a million different directions, and no matter what I choose, someone is going to get hurt. After I sent the money, my mom texted me constantly, thanking me and calling me her lifesaver. She kept saying things like, "We're so grateful, Maddie. This really saved us this month." This month. It was subtle, but the way she said it made me realize they were already expecting me to step in again next month. And the month after that. I knew I couldn't let this keep happening, so I made a plan to confront Chloe and Brandon directly. I texted Chloe and told her we needed to talk. I wanted to hear their side of things face to face because, frankly, my parents didn't seem to have the full picture of what was going on. Chloe invited me over to their house, and I figured it was the perfect opportunity to get some answers. What I didn't expect was to leave their house feeling like I didn't even know my own sister anymore. When I got there, Chloe was friendly enough at first, but I could tell she was on edge. Brandon, as usual, was nowhere to be seen, which annoyed me. This whole situation revolved around him just as much as it did Chloe, and yet he was conveniently absent. Their house, by the way, was way nicer than I expected. Granite countertops, fancy appliances, and a newly remodeled living room. For a couple who's apparently drowning in debt, they sure weren't living like it. I tried to ease into the conversation. I started by saying that I was concerned about Mom and Dad and wanted to understand how things got to this point. Chloe immediately got defensive. "Maddie, I don't know why you're making such a big deal out of this," she said. "Mom and Dad wanted to help us. We didn't force them to do anything." "That's not the point," I said, trying to keep my cool. "The point is, their savings are gone, and now they're asking me to step in and help. Don't you think that's a little unfair?" Chloe sighed and rolled her eyes. "Maddie, you don't get it. Brandon's business is just in a rough patch right now. Things will turn around soon. This is temporary." That's when I decided to cut to the chase. "Chloe, I know Brandon hasn't been paying his share of the mortgage. So where is his money going? And why haven't you stepped in to cover for him?" Her face turned red, and for a moment, I thought she was going to kick me out. But then she surprised me. She got quiet and said, "Fine. You want the truth? We're in way deeper than you think." I asked her what she meant, and that's when the flood of secrets started spilling out. Apparently, their financial problems didn't start with the house. Chloe admitted they were months behind on their mortgage payments, and the $15,000 my parents mentioned was the amount they needed to avoid foreclosure. She said the bank had given them a grace period to catch up, but if they didn't pay it soon, the foreclosure process would officially begin. I'd read somewhere that foreclosure laws vary by state, But the way Chloe was talking made it sound like they were hanging by a thread. Chloe and Brandon had already been struggling with credit card debt when they got married, and instead of tackling it, they ignored it and kept spending. By the time they decided to buy a house, they were already tens of thousands of dollars in debt. But instead of holding off and trying to get their finances under control, they convinced my parents to help with the down payment. "It's not like we lied to them," Chloe said, as if that made it better. "They knew we had some debt, but we figured we'd be able to pay it all off once Brandon's business took off." Only, Brandon's business never took off. He's apparently tried and failed at multiple ventures over the past few years, sinking thousands of dollars into each one. Chloe admitted she hasn't been keeping track of how much he's lost because it stresses her out too much to think about. "Do you have any idea how irresponsible that sounds?" I asked her, my voice rising despite myself. "You're living way beyond your means, and now you're dragging mom and dad. And me, down with you." Chloe got defensive again. "It's not like we planned for this to happen, Maddie. We're doing the best we can. And for the record, it's not your money that's bailing us out. It's mom and dad's. That's the problem." I snapped. "Their savings are gone, Chloe. Gone. They're risking their retirement because of you and Brandon, and now they're expecting me to fix it. Do you not see how insane that is?" She just sat there in silence for a moment, and I could see the guilt creeping into her face. But then, as if she'd flipped a switch, she said, "You're so judgmental, Maddie. Just because you don't have kids or a mortgage doesn't mean you know everything. Life is hard. Okay? You don't know what it's like to be in our shoes." I wanted to scream. It felt like every conversation I had with Chloe ended with her using her kids as a shield, and I was so sick of it. I told her I was done with the excuses, and that if she didn't start taking responsibility for her situation, things were going to get even worse. She didn't respond, so I left. The next day, I sat down with my parents to try to untangle the mess. I told them everything Chloe had admitted to me, but they didn't seem as shocked as I thought they'd be. My mom said, "We knew things were tight for them, but we didn't realize it was this bad." My dad, on the other hand, looked like he was about to have a meltdown. "I told you we shouldn't have given them that money," he muttered to my mom. "I told you this would happen." It was the first time I'd ever heard him criticize Chloe, and I could tell it hurt my mom to hear it. I asked them point blank if they were planning to keep helping Chloe and Brandon, and my mom looked me in the eye and said, "What choice do we have? They're our children." That's when I realized the full extent of the problem. My parents weren't just financially enabling Chloe and Brandon. They were emotionally enabling them, too. They couldn't say no because they felt like it was their job to keep rescuing them, no matter the cost. But here's the kicker. My mom admitted they were considering taking out a second mortgage on their house to keep helping Chloe. When I pushed for details, she told me the bank had approved them because their house was nearly paid off, giving them a lot of equity to borrow against. But I couldn't believe they'd willingly put their home at risk when they were already living on a fixed income. Didn't the bank question how they planned to repay it? My mom brushed me off, saying, "They just looked at the equity. It wasn't that hard." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Are you serious?" I asked. "You're willing to put yourselves at risk of losing your own home to bail them out? Do you not see how insane that is?" My mom got defensive, of course. "It's not that simple, Maddie. You don't understand what it's like to see your child struggle." "And what about me?" I asked, tears welling up in my eyes. "Do you understand what it's like to feel like you're only valued as a backup plan? To feel like I'm just here to clean up everyone else's mess?" That's when my dad stepped in. "Maddie, we don't want to put this on you, but we're in too deep. We don't know what else to do." After my conversation with Chloe and my parents, I made a decision. I wasn't going to give them another cent. I knew if I caved even once more, it would never stop. My boyfriend, Liam, was really supportive and kept reminding me that it's not my responsibility to fix this mess. "You've worked so hard to get where you are," he said. "Don't let them drag you down." He's right, of course. But logic doesn't stop the guilt. Every time I look at my phone, there's a text from my mom reminding me about Chloe's kids or a message from Chloe implying I'm being selfish. I've lost count of how many times I've heard the phrase, "family helps family." But here's the thing. Family also doesn't take advantage of you. That's what I keep telling myself, even as they ramp up the pressure. Last week, my mom called and said they needed to talk. Urgently. She sounded frantic, so I agreed to meet them at their house. When I got there, my dad looked exhausted, and my mom was pacing like a nervous wreck. Chloe and Brandon weren't there, which I was grateful for because I didn't think I could handle seeing them without losing my cool. That's when my mom dropped the latest bombshell. They were officially out of money. We've already missed one of Chloe's mortgage payments, my mom said, wringing her hands. And the bank is threatening to foreclose if we don't catch up. We need $15,000 to get them back on track. My jaw dropped. $15,000? Are you kidding me? I told them, point blank, that I didn't have that kind of money lying around. And even if I did, I wouldn't give it to them. That's when my mom started crying. Maddie, please, she begged. We don't know what else to do. If the bank takes the house, Chloe and the kids will have nowhere to go. And what will people think of us if we let that happen? We'll be the parents who let their daughter lose her home. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They were more worried about what the neighbors would think than about the fact that they were putting their entire financial future, and mine, in jeopardy. My mom got emotional and said, "You don't understand, Maddie. It's not just about Chloe. It's about the girls. We couldn't forgive ourselves if they ended up in a bad neighborhood or in some rental where they'd have to move every year. Kids need stability." "I'm sorry, Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But this isn't my problem to solve. You and Dad need to stop throwing money at Chloe and Brandon. They need to figure this out for themselves." My dad, who'd been silent up until that point, finally spoke up. "Maddie's right," he said. "We can't keep doing this. We've already put everything on the line, and it's still not enough. Maybe it's time for Chloe and Brandon to sell the house and downsize." My mom looked at him like he'd grown a second head. "David, we can't just abandon them like that. What about the kids? You're willing to let our granddaughters end up homeless?" "They won't be homeless, Karen," my dad said firmly. "They'll just have to live somewhere they can actually afford." My mom burst into tears again, and I could see the guilt eating away at my dad. But I felt a small flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, he was starting to see reason. That flicker didn't last long. The next day, Chloe called me in a rage. "What the hell, Maddie?" she yelled. "Did you seriously tell Mom and Dad to stop helping us? Do you have any idea what kind of stress that's putting on us right now?" I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Chloe, I didn't tell them to stop helping you. I told them they need to stop sacrificing their own financial future for yours. There's a difference." "Oh, give me a break," she snapped. "You don't care about Mom and Dad's future. You just don't want to help. Admit it. You've always been jealous of me." Jealous? That was it. I completely lost it. "Jealous of what, Chloe?" I shouted. "Jealous that you've spent your entire adult life mooching off Mom and Dad while I've worked my ass off to take care of myself? Jealous that you've made one bad decision after another and expect everyone else to clean up your mess? Yeah, sure. I'm so jealous." She started crying, which only made me angrier. "You don't get it, Maddie," she said through tears. "We're doing the best we can. Brandon is trying so hard to make things work, but it's not easy. And now you want us to lose our house? How could you be so heartless?" I couldn't take it anymore. "I'm not the one making you lose your house, Chloe. You and Brandon are doing that all on your own. You've been living way beyond your means for years, and now the rest of us are paying the price. Well, guess what? I'm done. I'm not bailing you out. Not now, not ever." I hung up before she could say anything else. That night, I got a call from my mom. She was crying again and begged me to reconsider. "Please, Maddie," she said. "We just need a little more time to get things under control. If you could help us cover this payment, I promise it'll be the last time." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But I knew it was a lie. This wasn't going to be the last time. It was never going to stop. "I'm sorry, Mom," I said, "but I can't keep doing this. I need to take care of myself." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Then she said, "I don't know who you are anymore, Maddie." That one hurt. A lot. But I didn't back down. Since then, things have been tense. My parents are barely speaking to me. Chloe is furious, and Brandon is apparently telling anyone who will listen that I'm selfish and ungrateful. Even Liam thinks I should take a step back from the drama for my own sanity. "You've done everything you can, Maddie," he said. Now it's on them. He's right. But it still feels awful. I love my family, and I hate that things have come to this. But I also know I can't keep sacrificing my own future to clean up their mess. I've spent my entire life being the responsible one, and all it's gotten me is resentment and guilt. I'm not sure what's going to happen next. My parents are still talking about taking out a second mortgage, and Chloe is still clinging to the idea that Brandon's business will magically save them. Meanwhile, I'm trying to focus on myself and figure out how to let go of the guilt. How do you walk away from a mess like this without feeling like a terrible person? How do you protect yourself when it feels like your entire family is against you? After the explosive conversations with my parents and Chloe, I decided to stick to my guns. I wasn't going to give them any more money. I didn't reach this decision lightly, but I realized I couldn't keep setting myself on fire to keep everyone else warm. Liam, my boyfriend, has been reminding me of this over and over. You can't save people who don't want to save themselves. I knew he was right, but cutting them off emotionally was much harder than cutting them off financially. My parents' second mortgage plan moved ahead despite my protests. I tried one last time to convince them not to go through with it, but my mom was adamant. We don't have a choice, Maddie, she said. We can't let Chloe and the girls lose their home. You wouldn't understand because you're not a mother. That line stung more than I'd like to admit. I don't know why my mom keeps bringing up the fact that I don't have kids, as if that makes me less capable of understanding responsibility or compassion. I think it's just her way of dismissing me whenever I try to challenge her choices. The day after they finalized the second mortgage, Chloe called me. I didn't want to answer, but curiosity got the better of me. She didn't even try to hide her gloating. Mom and Dad are lifesavers, she said. We're finally caught up on the mortgage and Brandon's business is starting to pick up. Everything's going to be fine now. Chloe, I said, trying to stay calm. Do you hear yourself? They've put their home at risk, their home, to save yours. That's not something to celebrate. Oh, come on, Maddie, she said with a laugh. They're not going to lose their house. You're so dramatic. I couldn't believe how cavalier she was being. You know what, Chloe? I hope you're right. I hope Brandon's business takes off and everything works out. But I can't keep doing this with you. I can't be the backup plan when everything inevitably falls apart again. She got defensive, of course. You're so selfish, Maddie. All you ever think about is yourself. That's when I decided I was done. No more explanations, no more trying to justify myself. I told her, think whatever you want, Chloe. But from now on, I'm focusing on myself. Don't call me again unless it's to take responsibility for your own mess. And then I hung up. I wish I could tell you that things magically got better after that, but they didn't. In fact, they got worse. About a week later, my dad called me and asked if I'd come over for dinner. I hesitated, but I could tell from his tone that something was wrong, so I agreed. When I got there, my mom wouldn't even look me in the eye. My dad sat me down and told me that things were worse than they'd let on. They were already struggling to make the payments on the second mortgage. I wasn't surprised, but it still made my stomach sink. My dad admitted that my mom had been pressuring him to ask me for more money, but he refused. I told her we've already asked too much of you, he said. It's not fair. I could see how tired he was, physically, emotionally, financially. For the first time in this whole ordeal, I felt like he understood where I was coming from. But then he said something that broke my heart. Maddie, I think we're going to have to sell the house. It was like a punch to the gut. This was the house I'd grown up in. The house where we'd celebrated Christmases and birthdays, where I'd cried over breakups and laughed until my stomach hurt. And now, because of Chloe and Brandon, my parents were going to lose it. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to offer to help, to do whatever I could to save the house. But I knew that would only prolong the inevitable. They'd dig themselves into a deeper hole, and I'd get dragged down with them. So I stayed quiet. The fallout from that conversation was huge. My mom blamed me, of course. She said if I had just stepped up like a good daughter, none of this would have happened. Chloe, predictably, called me a monster. She said I was tearing the family apart and that I should be ashamed of myself. Brandon even sent me a passive-aggressive text saying, "Thanks for abandoning your family when they needed you most." It was like a coordinated attack, but I didn't budge. A few days later, Liam and I were having dinner, and I just broke down. I told him how guilty I felt, how I couldn't stop replaying my mom's words in my head. What if she's right? I asked him through tears. What if I really am selfish? Liam put his fork down and looked me in the eye. Maddie, your mom and Chloe are manipulating you. You're not selfish. You've been carrying this family on your back for years, and it's time to let them carry their own weight. They made these choices, not you. It was exactly what I needed to hear. I decided then and there to go low contact with my family. I couldn't keep subjecting myself to their toxicity. I sent my parents a message explaining my decision and told them I loved them but needed space. My mom didn't reply. My dad said he understood. Fast forward a few weeks, my parents officially sold their house. Hayes sold it for less than they'd hoped, but thankfully it was enough to pay off the second mortgage and still leave them with a small nest egg. They moved into a 2-bedroom condo nearby, which is much smaller but at least affordable on their limited income. My dad said it felt strange not to live in the house they'd had for 30 years, but he admitted it was a relief not to have the financial pressure hanging over them anymore. It was heartbreaking, but I think it was the wake-up call they needed. They moved into a smaller place that they can actually afford, and my dad has started talking about getting a part-time job to supplement their income. I'm cautiously optimistic that they're starting to take responsibility for their own situation. As for Chloe and Brandon, they're still in their house for now. Brandon's business hasn't taken off, and I've heard through the grapevine that they're behind on their mortgage again. I've stayed true to my word and haven't bailed them out. It's hard, especially when I think about my nieces, but I know it's the right thing to do. I've been spending a lot of time reflecting on everything that's happened, and here's what I've realized. Setting boundaries doesn't make you selfish. It makes you strong. For years, I let my family guilt me into thinking I owed them something, but I've finally learned that love isn't about sacrifice. It's about respect. And if they can't respect me, then I have to respect myself enough to walk away. It's been a painful journey, but I'm starting to feel like I can breathe again. I'm focusing on my career, my relationship with Liam, and my own financial goals. I don't know what the future holds for my family, but for now, I'm at peace with my decision. When father fell ill, everyone remembered the forgotten son, and I remembered the $300,000 that my brother and sister received. So I set my conditions and, growing up, I always knew my family was a little different. Not in the quirky, charming way some families are, but in a more subtle, insidious manner that only became clear as I got older. My parents, James and Linda, had a way of making me feel like an outsider in my own home. I have 2 younger siblings, Ethan and Sophia, who always seemed to be the golden children. I never knew why, but everything seemed to come easier for them. Like the universe was handing them life on a silver platter while I was left scrambling to get by. It wasn't just in my head. I distinctly remember one summer when I was about 16. I wanted to join this summer coding camp. I'd been obsessed with computers and programming ever since I could remember, and this camp felt like my ticket to something bigger. I spent weeks psyching myself up to ask my parents, convinced they'd be thrilled about me wanting to do something constructive with my time. But when I finally worked up the courage, their reaction was nothing like I'd hoped. "We can't afford that right now," my dad said flatly, without even looking up from his newspaper. "Why don't you find a summer job instead? You need to learn the value of hard work." I was crushed. I could have understood if they were genuinely strapped for cash, but that same summer, they paid for Sophia to go on a high school trip to Europe and got Ethan a brand new car for his 17th birthday. It wasn't just about money, it was about priority. And I was never the priority. The favoritism wasn't always about big-ticket items, though. It was in the everyday moments, too. I remember one time when my dad had promised to take us all to a baseball game. I was ecstatic. It felt like a chance to bond as a family, maybe even break down some of the walls that had been built up over the years. But when the day finally came, Ethan and Sophia were the only ones who got to go. Dad pulled me aside and said he only had enough tickets for 2 and figured it wouldn't be a big deal if I sat this one out. Those little moments accumulated over the years, stacking on top of one another until they became too heavy to bear. By the time I graduated high school, I was desperate to escape. College was my ticket out, but, of course, my parents didn't offer to pay for it. I took out loans, worked nights, and barely scraped by. Meanwhile, Ethan and Sophia had their tuition and living expenses covered by my parents as if it were the most natural thing in the world. They got to experience college without the stress of juggling work and school, and I envied them for it. For years, I tried to convince myself it didn't matter. I told myself that their support or lack thereof wasn't going to define my life. I threw myself into my studies, then my career, hoping that if I worked hard enough, I could prove to them, and to myself, that I didn't need their help. I could be successful on my own terms. But then I found out about the $300,000. I'd gone home for the first time in years for Thanksgiving, determined to show them that I was doing well, that I didn't need their validation. I kept up appearances, pretending everything was fine, and then, in the middle of the family dinner, I overheard my dad talking to Ethan about managing the money. I didn't think much of it at first, but later that night, curiosity got the best of me. When I asked Ethan about it, he laughed, like I was asking about some well-known family secret. "Oh, yeah, didn't you know? Mom and Dad gave me and Sophia $300,000 each to help us get started. They did it a couple of years ago." He shrugged it off like it was no big deal, as if every parent handed their kids a small fortune and just forgot to mention it to their other child. I felt my stomach drop. I wanted to scream, to confront my parents right then and there, but I couldn't find the words. I just stood there, dumbfounded. As Ethan went on about his latest investment plans and how he was thinking of starting his own business, I realized in that moment that all my suspicions had been right. My parents really didn't see me as one of their own, at least not in the same way they saw Ethan and Sophia. I didn't stay the rest of the weekend. I packed up my things, mumbled some excuse about a work emergency, and drove home. The entire drive, I couldn't stop replaying every memory, every moment where I'd been pushed aside, wondering what I had done to be so thoroughly rejected by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. After that, I cut them off. I changed my number, moved to a new city, and blocked them on social media. I didn't need their toxic influence in my life. I was going to build something for myself without them, and I was going to prove that I was worth more than they'd ever given me credit for. The next few years were a blur of hard work and sleepless nights. I poured everything I had into my startup, working until I could barely keep my eyes open. It wasn't easy, but it was the first time in my life I felt like I had something that was truly mine, something no one could take away. And slowly but surely, things started to fall into place. I landed a few big clients, the company grew, and before I knew it, I was sitting in a boardroom, signing the papers that would make me a millionaire. It felt surreal. Part of me wanted to call my parents, to tell them about my success, but I stopped myself. They didn't deserve to share in my triumph. They had given up on me long ago, and now, I was finally ready to give up on them. But life, as it often does, had other plans. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't pick up, but something told me to answer. It was my mom. I hadn't heard her voice in years, and for a second, I almost didn't recognize it. She sounded older, more fragile, as if the years had finally caught up with her. "Liam," she said, her voice cracking. "We need your help." I sat there, stunned, as she explained that Dad was sick. They didn't have the money for the treatments he needed, and Ethan and Sophia were in no position to help. I felt a surge of anger rise up in me, but I kept my voice steady. I asked her about the $300,000, and she stammered, saying something about poor investments and bad luck. They had nothing left. "We're family," she pleaded. "We always take care of each other." I wanted to laugh, to scream, to tell her exactly where she could shove her plea for help. But something held me back. Maybe it was the years of conditioning, the part of me that still wanted their approval, or maybe it was the faintest glimmer of hope that things could be different. I told her I'd think about it, and hung up. I stared at my phone for a long time, wondering what kind of twisted game life was playing with me. I had spent so long trying to free myself from their grasp, only for them to claw their way back in just when I thought I was finally free. When I left my family behind, I thought I'd finally put all of that pain and bitterness behind me. But it turns out that kind of betrayal doesn't just go away. It fuels you, it pushes you, and sometimes it consumes you. I threw myself into my career with a kind of intensity I'd never felt before. If I was going to prove to myself that I didn't need them, I was going to have to make it big. And that's exactly what I set out to do. I'd always been good with technology, so I figured if I was going to make a name for myself, it would be in the tech industry. I moved to a new city, took a job at a small startup, and started learning everything I could about coding, product development, and business strategy. I worked ridiculous hours, sometimes sleeping on the office floor and living on vending machine snacks. But I didn't care. Every time I felt like giving up, I reminded myself of the look on my father's face when he told me to earn my way. I was going to do just that. A few years in, I felt ready to take a risk. I had a solid idea for an app that could make communication easier for remote teams. A big need given the way the world was changing. I scraped together what little savings I had and went all in, quitting my job to start my own company. I had no idea if it would work, but failure wasn't an option. I was running on a mix of desperation and sheer stubbornness. Things were tough in the beginning. I couldn't afford to hire anyone, so I did everything myself: coding, marketing, customer service. There were nights I didn't sleep at all, running on coffee and the drive to prove that I was capable of success on my own. Slowly but surely, though, I started to gain traction. I secured a few small investors, got featured in a tech blog, and soon enough, I was seeing downloads and positive feedback from users. It was happening. I was building something real, something that was mine. I hadn't spoken to my family since that Thanksgiving debacle, and honestly, it felt like a relief. Every now and then, I'd see a post on social media about my siblings. Ethan was still pursuing his so-called investments, and Sophia was living her best life, taking vacations to tropical islands and posting about her luxury lifestyle. I couldn't help but feel a pang of resentment. They were living easy lives, thanks to my parents' money, while I was out here busting my ass to make something of myself. But the resentment became less and less as I grew more successful. I realized I didn't need their validation anymore. And then, the moment I'd been waiting for finally came. I got an offer from a major tech company interested in buying my app. It was a dream come true. After a few intense negotiations, I signed the papers, and just like that, I was a millionaire. I felt a mix of disbelief and euphoria. I had done it. I had achieved something they never believed I could. I was finally free, financially and emotionally. For a while, I lived in blissful solitude. I traveled, bought myself a nice apartment, and indulged in the little things I'd always denied myself. I was happy, or at least I thought I was. But something was still nagging at me. A small voice in the back of my mind that wouldn't let me rest. I wondered if, despite everything, my family would ever care about what I'd accomplished. Did they even know? Would they ever understand what it took for me to get here? Months went by, and I convinced myself that I was over it. I didn't need their recognition. I had done this for me. But then, one day, I got a call. An unknown number. Normally, I'd ignore it, but something compelled me to answer. Hello? Liam? The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, but there was something about it that felt eerily familiar. It's Mom. My heart sank. After all this time, hearing her voice again felt like a punch to the gut. I hadn't expected to ever hear from her again, and suddenly, all the old wounds were ripped open. What do you want? I asked, keeping my voice as cold as possible. Liam, it's your father. He's sick. We need your help. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to hang up right then and there, but another part of me, a part one thought I'd buried, felt a twinge of guilt. After everything they'd done, they were asking for my help? The audacity was almost laughable. Why should I help you? I finally replied, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and something else I couldn't quite name. You didn't think about me when you gave Ethan and Sophia that money. You didn't care when I was struggling. There was a long silence on the other end, and I could hear her take a shaky breath. I know, Liam, and I'm sorry. We should have been there for you, but things were complicated. Complicated. That was the word they always used when they didn't want to admit they were wrong. I felt my anger boiling over, but I forced myself to stay calm. I don't owe you anything, I said firmly. I built my life without you. Why should I come back now? Because he's your father, Liam, and because we're family. We always take care of each other. Family. The word felt foreign coming from her. For as long as I could remember, They had treated me as if I didn't belong, as if I was an inconvenience they had to tolerate. Now, they were trying to use that same bond to guilt me into helping them? I need to think about this, I said, and before she could say another word, I hung up. My hands were shaking, and I could feel the familiar weight of anger and betrayal settling back over me. I had spent so long trying to escape from them, and now they were dragging me back in. For the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about that call. Part of me wanted to leave them to their fate, to let them suffer the consequences of their own choices. But another part of me, the part that had once longed for their approval, felt a pang of guilt. Despite everything, they were still my family. And for better or worse, that connection was something I couldn't just erase. After a week of agonizing over it, I made a decision. I wasn't going to help them out of the goodness of my heart, but I would hear them out. If they wanted my help, they were going to have to answer some hard questions first. I wanted to know exactly what they had done with that $300,000 and why they thought they could just waltz back into my life and demand my support after years of neglect. I called my mom back and arranged to meet her and my father at a neutral location, a coffee shop near their house. I wasn't ready to go back home, to step into the place where so many painful memories had been made. I needed to keep some distance, both physically and emotionally. When I arrived, they were already there, sitting at a small table by the window. My dad looked old, much older than I remembered. His face was pale and drawn, and he seemed to have shrunk into himself, as if the weight of his illness had physically diminished him. My mom looked tired, too, with dark circles under her eyes and a tense expression that I had never seen before. I sat down, keeping my expression neutral. "All right," I said, folding my hands on the table. "Explain. What happened to all that money?" My mom glanced at my dad, and he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "We made some bad investments," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "We thought we were doing the right thing, but things didn't work out the way we planned." "Bad investments?" I repeated, struggling to keep my voice steady. "You gave Ethan and Sophia $300,000 each, and now you're telling me you don't have anything left?" My dad looked down, avoiding my gaze. "Ethan lost a lot of it in some business ventures that went south. And Sophia, well, she has a lot of debt. We tried to help them, but it just made things worse." I felt a bitter laugh escape my lips. "So, you're telling me that after years of putting them first, you finally realized that maybe you made a mistake?" They didn't respond, and the silence that followed was almost unbearable. I could see the regret in their eyes, but it didn't make me feel any better. If anything, it only made me angrier. They had spent years ignoring me, and now, when they were at rock bottom, they were expecting me to pick up the pieces. "I don't know if I can help you," I said, standing up. "I have a life of my own now, and I don't think you realize how much damage you've done." My mom reached out, grabbing my arm. "Please, Liam," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "We're sorry. We know we made mistakes, but we're still your family. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" I looked down at her hand, then back up at her face. For a moment, I saw the mother I had once loved, the woman who had sung me to sleep and kissed my scrapes and bruises. But that person was gone, replaced by someone who had chosen to put me last time and time again. "I need some time to think," I said, gently pulling my arm away. "I'll let you know what I decide." As I walked out of the coffee shop, I felt a strange sense of relief. I had finally said what I needed to say, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control. My parents might have called me back into their lives, but I was the one holding the cards now. And whatever I decided, it would be on my terms. After that tense meeting with my parents, I felt like I'd barely scratched the surface of what I needed to know. I had thought that finally confronting them would give me some sense of closure, but instead, it only raised more questions. I found myself thinking about the money again and again, obsessing over how they could have handed my siblings such a fortune only to end up begging me for help now. It felt like some kind of twisted joke. The next day, I called Ethan. I hadn't spoken to him directly in years, but if I was going to consider helping my parents, I needed the full story. Surprisingly, he picked up right away, his voice casual as if we hadn't gone years without speaking. "Liam." "Hey man, long time," he said, a little too cheerfully. "Ethan, we need to talk," I replied, skipping any pleasantries. "I met with Mom and Dad yesterday. They told me about the money." There was a brief silence on the other end, and I could almost hear the wheels turning in his head. "Yeah, I figured they might mention that," he said slowly. "Look, I know what it sounds like, but things just didn't go as planned." "Really?" I replied, my voice laced with sarcasm. "Because it sounds to me like you both got handed a small fortune while I was left with nothing. And now, you're broke? How exactly does that happen?" He let out a long sigh, and I could sense the frustration in his voice. "I made some bad investments, okay? I tried to get a business off the ground, but I didn't have the experience. It's not like I planned for things to go south." "Sure, Ethan, but what about Sophia? Mom said she's in debt too. What happened there?" He hesitated, and I could tell there was more to the story than he was letting on. "Sophia, well, she got into some trouble with credit cards. She was living a little beyond her means, and things got out of hand. I tried to help her, but it was too much for both of us." I felt a mix of anger and disbelief. They had both been given the opportunities I'd only dreamed of, and they had squandered them so easily. "And you just expected Mom and Dad to keep bailing you out?" I asked, unable to hide the edge in my voice. "It wasn't like that," he replied defensively. "Look, I know you think we had it easy, but it wasn't a walk in the park. They had expectations, Liam. They wanted us to live up to some impossible standard, and when things went wrong, they just threw money at the problem and hoped it would go away." I wanted to feel sorry for him, but I couldn't. He was talking about being handed hundreds of thousands of dollars as if it were some kind of burden. I had worked for everything I had, and here he was, acting like he'd been the victim of bad luck. "Well, now they're out of money," I said, cutting the conversation short, "and they're asking me to bail them out. So tell me, why should I?" Ethan was silent for a moment, and I could hear him take a deep breath. "Because they're our parents, Liam. We owe them something, don't we?" I didn't answer. The idea that I owed them anything felt like a slap in the face. But there was a part of me, a small, irrational part, that couldn't completely ignore the bond we shared. Despite everything, they were still my family, and I couldn't completely turn my back on them without at least hearing them out. After I hung up, I called Sophia. If I was going to do this, I needed to hear her side of the story too. Unlike Ethan, she was a little harder to reach. It took a few tries before she finally picked up, and when she did, her voice was tinged with exhaustion. "Liam? I didn't expect to hear from you," she said, sounding surprised. "Yeah, well, I didn't expect to hear from Mom and Dad either," I replied. "They told me about the money, Sophia. I know about the debt. I need to understand what happened." She sighed, and I could almost picture her rubbing her temples, the way she used to when we were kids and she was stressed about something. "It's complicated, Liam. I thought I had things under control, but then one thing led to another and, well, here we are." "Complicated how?" I pressed, unwilling to let her off the hook that easily. She took a moment before answering. "I was trying to keep up, you know? All my friends were traveling, buying nice things, and I got caught up in it. I didn't realize how bad it was until it was too late. And by then, the debt was piling up faster than I could pay it off." "So you're telling me you spent it all on clothes and vacations?" I couldn't keep the judgment out of my voice. "It's not that simple, Liam," she said, her tone defensive. "I know I made mistakes, but it wasn't just about the money. I was trying to live up to expectations, to be the person they wanted me to be." "And how did that work out for you?" I asked, my anger bubbling over. She didn't answer, and I could feel the weight of her silence. I wanted to believe that she was just a victim of circumstance, that somehow all of this was beyond her control, but deep down, I knew better. They had been given every advantage, every opportunity, and they had thrown it all away. "I can't just hand over money to fix this, Sophia," I said finally. "I need to know that things will be different this time. I'm not going to be your safety net." She let out a shaky breath, and I could hear the defeat in her voice. "I understand, Liam. I know you don't owe us anything. I wish things had been different." As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange sense of relief. I had finally said my piece, and now, the decision was mine to make. I wasn't going to let them guilt me into helping them, but if I did choose to step in, it would be on my terms. I agreed to meet with my parents one last time to discuss the specifics. I told them that I wasn't going to just hand over money, and if they wanted my help, they were going to have to play by my rules. We met at the same coffee shop, and this time, I came prepared with a list of conditions. I'll cover Dad's medical expenses, I began, looking them both in the eye. But I'm not giving you cash. I'll set up a trust, and the money will only go towards his treatment and necessary living expenses. Anything beyond that, and you're on your own. My mom looked relieved, but my dad's face fell. What about Ethan and Sophia? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. They're in trouble too, Liam. They need your help. I shook my head. They made their choices. I'll help you, but I'm not responsible for their mistakes. If they want my support, they'll have to earn it. They looked at each other, a mixture of resignation and disappointment in their eyes. I could tell they wanted more, that they were hoping I'd swoop in and save the day. But I wasn't the same person they had pushed aside all those years ago. I had worked too hard to let them drag me back down. I'm giving you a way out, I said, standing up. Take it or leave it. As I walked out of the coffee shop, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. I had finally taken control of my own narrative, and for the first time, I was making decisions based on my own terms. I wasn't going to be their safety net, but I wasn't going to abandon them completely either. I was done playing by their rules, and now they would have to live with mine. In the weeks that followed, I set up the trust and made arrangements for my dad's medical care. I kept my distance, refusing to let them back into my life any more than necessary. I had done my part, and now it was up to them to figure out the rest. After setting up the trust for my dad's medical expenses, I tried to distance myself, hoping that would be the end of it. But, as with most things involving my family, nothing is ever that simple. I soon found myself in a new web of complications, especially with my siblings. Ethan and Sophia were furious about the conditions I had imposed, and they weren't shy about letting me know. The first confrontation came from Ethan. He called me one night, his voice laced with bitterness. You think you're better than us now, huh? He sneered. Just because you made a little money, you think you can waltz back in and call all the shots? I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. I'm not trying to be better than anyone, Ethan, but I have to protect myself. I'm willing to help, but I'm not going to throw money into a black hole. A black hole? Is that what you think of us? He snapped. We're your family, Liam. We're supposed to look out for each other. Funny, I don't remember you looking out for me when I was struggling to get by, I replied, unable to hide the edge in my voice. You had everything handed to you, and you still managed to blow it all. I'm not going to make the same mistake. Ethan didn't have a comeback for that. Instead, he hung up, leaving me alone with the echo of his anger. I knew he would be upset, but a part of me had hoped that he would understand. I wasn't doing this to punish him. I was trying to help, but I wasn't going to sacrifice myself in the process. A few days later, Sophia called. Unlike Ethan, she wasn't as confrontational, but her disappointment was palpable. I know you think you're doing the right thing, she said, her voice soft, almost pleading. But we're your siblings, Liam. We've made mistakes, sure, but we're still family. I know, Sophia, I replied, feeling a pang of guilt, but I can't keep enabling those mistakes. If you want my help, you have to show me that you're willing to change. She sighed, and I could hear the weariness in her voice. I don't know if I can do that, Liam. I've tried, but I don't know. There was a vulnerability in her voice that I hadn't heard before, and for a moment, I felt a surge of compassion. I wanted to help her, to make things right, but I also knew that I couldn't do it for her. She had to want it for herself, and that was something I couldn't control. After our conversation, I decided to lay out some additional conditions for any further support. I called both of them and told them that I would only consider helping with their financial issues if they agreed to go to financial counseling and take accountability for their spending. I wasn't sure if they would agree, but I knew it was the only way I could be involved without feeling like I was just throwing money away. To my surprise, they both agreed. I wasn't sure if it was out of genuine desire to change or just desperation, but either way, it felt like a small victory. I set up appointments with a financial counselor and made it clear that this was their last chance. If they didn't follow through, I I was out, no questions asked. The next few weeks were a strange mix of hope and anxiety. Part of me wanted to believe that they would take this opportunity to turn things around, but another part of me was waiting for the other shoe to drop. I knew my family too well to expect an easy resolution, and I braced myself for whatever was to come. And, as usual, things didn't go as planned. One evening, I got a call from the financial counselor. She sounded frustrated, almost exasperated. "Mr. Evans, I wanted to reach out because I've had some difficulties with your siblings. They've missed multiple appointments, and when they do show up, they're not exactly cooperative." I felt a surge of anger and disappointment. I had put so much effort into setting this up, and they couldn't even be bothered to take it seriously. "Thank you for letting me know," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'll talk to them." After I hung up, I felt a familiar sense of betrayal wash over me. I had given them a chance, a real chance, to get their lives together, and they had thrown it away. I called Ethan first, but he didn't pick up. Then I tried Sophia, and after a few rings, she finally answered. "Sophia, what's going on?" I asked, unable to keep the frustration out of my voice. "The counselor told me you've been missing appointments." She sighed, and I could hear the resignation in her voice. "I'm sorry, Liam. I thought I could do it, but it's harder than I thought." "That's not an excuse," I replied, my patience wearing thin. "I set this up because I wanted to help you, but you have to meet me halfway. If you're not willing to put in the effort, then I'm done. I can't keep doing this." There was a long silence on the other end, and for a moment, I thought she had hung up. But then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know. I'm sorry, Liam. I didn't mean to let you down." I didn't know what to say. I wanted to believe her, but I wasn't sure if I could. I had given them so many chances, and each time, they had found a way to let me down. I felt trapped in a cycle of hope and disappointment, unable to break free. Over the next few days, I tried to distance myself, focusing on my own life and letting go of any expectations I had for them. I had done everything I could, and now it was up to them. If they wanted to change, they would have to do it on their own. And then, just when I thought I had finally found some peace, my mother called. Her voice was frantic, filled with a level of desperation I hadn't heard before. "Liam, please, you have to help us," she cried, her words tumbling out in a rush. "Your father's condition has gotten worse, and we don't have the money for his treatment. We're going to lose everything." I felt a wave of frustration and sadness wash over me. I had already set up a trust for his medical expenses, and I knew that there should be enough money to cover his treatment. "What do you mean, you don't have the money?" I asked, my voice sharp. "I set up the trust specifically for this." She hesitated, and I could hear the fear in her voice. "There were unexpected expenses," she stammered. "We had to use some of the money for other things, and now there's not enough left." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. "I told you that money was for Dad's treatment. Nothing else. How could you do this?" "I'm sorry, Liam," she whispered, her voice breaking. "We didn't have a choice. We were desperate." I felt a surge of anger and betrayal, but I forced myself to stay calm. "All right," I said finally. "I'll take care of it. But this is the last time. If you can't respect the conditions I've set, then I'm done." After I hung up, I felt a strange sense of relief. I had finally set a boundary, one that I knew I wouldn't break. I had done my part, and now it was up to them to live with the consequences. In the weeks that followed, I managed the trust myself, overseeing every expense and making sure that the money was used solely for my dad's treatment. It was exhausting, but it gave me a sense of control that I hadn't felt before. I was no longer at their mercy, and I wasn't going to let them drag me back into their chaos. By the end of it all, I had done everything I could. I had set up the trust, imposed conditions, and given them multiple chances to prove themselves. But they had chosen their path, and now they would have to live with it. I was done playing the role of the savior, done trying to fix their mistakes. I had finally taken control of my own life, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. I had spent too long trying to earn their love, trying to prove that I was worth something. But now, I knew that I didn't need their approval. I had built something for myself, something that they couldn't take away. And as I walked away from it all, I felt a strange sense of peace. I had finally broken free from their hold, and I was ready to start a new chapter of my life, one that was defined by my own choices, not theirs. I had done my part, and now I was ready to move on. After setting up the final arrangements for my dad's medical care and imposing strict boundaries on my family, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I had done everything within my power to help, and now I was done. For the first time in years, I felt like I could finally breathe again. I spent the next few months focusing on myself. I invested time in friendships that had taken a back seat during my years of working nonstop. I even met someone, Emily, a smart, compassionate woman who had no idea about my family drama. Being with her was like a breath of fresh air. She was interested in me, not my financial situation or my family history. For once, I could just be myself without the weight of all the old baggage. Emily and I grew close quickly. I confided in her about my family, all the drama and betrayal, and she listened without judgment. She didn't try to tell me what to do or how to feel. She just let me vent. She was exactly what I needed. Someone who saw me for who I was, flaws and all. One evening, as we sat together watching the sunset, she took my hand and asked, "Do you ever think about reconnecting with them?" The question caught me off guard. I thought I had put all of that behind me, but hearing her say it brought all those old emotions back to the surface. Honestly, I don't know if there's anything left to reconnect to, I replied, staring out at the horizon. They've hurt me so many times, and I don't think I can go through that again. She nodded, squeezing my hand. Sometimes family isn't about blood. It's about the people who are there for you, who lift you up instead of tearing you down. Her words stayed with me long after that conversation. I had always thought of family as something I was born into, something that was a part of me whether I liked it or not. But maybe it was something I could choose. Maybe I could build my own family, one that wasn't defined by betrayal and resentment. In the weeks that followed, I started to reevaluate what family meant to me. I began reaching out to old friends, people I had lost touch with over the years. I rebuilt those connections, and in doing so, I found a sense of belonging that I hadn't felt in a long time. I realized that I didn't need my biological family to feel complete. I could create my own support system, one that was built on mutual respect and love. One day, out of the blue, I received a message from Mark, a childhood friend of Ethan's who I hadn't seen in years. He'd heard about my success and wanted to catch up. I was hesitant at first, unsure of what he might want, but curiosity got the better of me, and I agreed to meet him for coffee. As we sat down, Mark looked at me with an intensity that took me by surprise. "Liam, I've got something to tell you. It's about your family." I felt a knot form in my stomach. I had thought I was done with all of that, but here it was, dragging me back in once again. "What about them?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He took a deep breath before speaking. "I don't know how much you know, but Ethan and Sophia, they weren't just bad with money. They were involved in some pretty shady stuff. I'm talking loans, gambling debts, things that could get them in serious trouble." I felt a surge of anger mixed with disbelief. I had known they were irresponsible, but this was something else entirely. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, struggling to process the information. "Because I thought you deserved to know the truth," he replied, his voice steady. "They were using the money your parents gave them to fund some risky ventures, and when it all fell apart, they tried to cover it up. That's why your parents were so desperate. They weren't just out of money. They were in over their heads." It all made sense now. The pleas for help, the mysterious, unexpected expenses, the guilt tripping. It had all been part of a larger scheme. I felt a sense of betrayal that was almost too much to bear. I had given them chance after chance, and they had lied to me every step of the way. For a moment, I considered confronting them, but then I realized it wouldn't change anything. They would deny it, deflect, and somehow try to make it my fault. I was done playing their games. I had spent too long letting their actions dictate my life, and I wasn't going to let them control me any longer. I thanked Mark for telling me the truth and left the coffee shop, feeling a strange sense of closure. I knew now that I had made the right decision by cutting them off. They had chosen their path, and now they would have to live with the consequences. I went home that night and told Emily everything. She listened, holding my hand as I poured out all the anger and hurt I had been carrying for so long. When I finished, she looked at me with a calm determination that gave me a sense of peace. "You did the right thing, Liam. You don't owe them anything." Hearing her say it made me realize that I had been holding onto a sense of obligation that was never mine to bear. I had done my best to help them, but at the end of the day, they were responsible for their own choices. I couldn't save them, and I didn't need to. From that moment on, I made a conscious decision to let go. I blocked their numbers, deleted their contacts, and removed myself from the cycle of guilt and manipulation that had defined my life for so long. I was done trying to fix what was broken, and instead, I focused on building something new. With Emily by my side, I began to create a life that was truly my own. I invested in friendships, built a network of people who supported me, and finally found a sense of belonging that I had always longed for. I realized that family wasn't something you were born into. It was something you built, one connection at a time. A year later, Emily and I got married in a small, intimate ceremony with just a handful of close friends. It was nothing like the grand weddings I had seen growing up, but it was perfect. I was surrounded by people who loved me for who I was, not what I could give them. For the first time in my life, I felt at peace. As we stood together, exchanging vows under a clear blue sky, I knew that I had finally found my place. I had redefined what family meant to me, and in doing so, I had freed myself from the chains of the past. I was no longer Liam, the black sheep, the forgotten son. I was Liam, a husband, a friend, a man who had found his way back to himself. In the end, I didn't need my family's approval to feel complete. I had built a life that was filled with love, respect, and joy, a life that was truly mine. And as I looked into Emily's eyes, I knew that I had finally found the family I had always deserved. If you like this story, subscribe right away and listen to new stories every day. Let us know what you like the most in the comments.